それでは最後のセッションに移ります。このセッションではインベスコ世界厳選株式オープン愛称世界のベストの運用責任者スティーブン・アネスさんに私から質問させていただく形で進めてまいりたいと思います。貴重な機会です。お呼びいたします。スティーブンさん、ぜひこちらにお越しください。よろしくお願いいたします。拍手でお迎えください。じゃあそれではスティーブンさんから銘柄選びの極意を伺う前に、私から今この日本で人気になっているスティーブンさんが運営しますファンドについて簡単にご紹介をさせていただきたいと思います。こちらです。インベスコ世界厳選株式オープン愛称世界のベストというファンドをスティーブンさん運用されているんですけれども、この世界のベストは日本を含む先進国の株式の中からおよそ40から50銘柄に絞って厳選投資を行うファンドです。日本では1999年の1月に設定運用が開始されていまして、25年を超える長い運用実績を誇っています。為替ヘッジと決算の仕方によって6つのファンドに分かれています。一部は NISA の成長投資枠で購入が可能です。そしてこちらが9月末時点でのグラフとなっているんですけれども、純資産総額3兆円を超えまして、この世界のベスト105ヶ月連続で純資金流入を記録しておりまして、2025年純資金流入額第1位のアクティブファンドです。すごい人気ですよね。はい。それではスティーブさん、今日はようこそお越しくださいました。まず簡単に自己紹介とこの世界のベストがどういう運用をしているのか教えてください。
Thank you. So I'm Stephen Annis, head of global equity investments in the UK. It's a real honour to be here to meet Japanese end investors in person. But actually, we work in the UK, but not in London. We actually work in a very small town called Henley. And I've been in investment management for about 20 years, and I've managed both UK and global equity funds. And in 2020, I was made the lead PM of this portfolio and also the head of the global equities team. So these are the key points of the Global Best Fund. And look, when it comes to investment, we really do focus on growth, dividends and valuation. And those are the key factors in stock selection. And we actively manage using a bottom-up approach and typically investing in around 40 to 50 carefully selected stocks within the fund. And this slide summarizes our investment process, and we carefully form those 40 to 50 stocks within the portfolio. So we want a focused portfolio of our best ideas, and there's really strong competition, therefore, to get into the fund. We then build a portfolio of those best ideas, but we try to avoid excess factor or style bias, and typically we use a correlation analysis to do this. And this is to make sure that the portfolio can work in a range of different conditions, and we call this our all-weather approach.
そして直近の運用成績を見ますと、過去3年、5年の年率換算リターンが世界株式のインデックスですね、これを上回りました。この好成績の秘訣というのは、銘柄選択力によるものなんでしょうか。
Well, as a result of the investment process that I explained earlier, and the focus of our investment, which is those sort of traditional approach to stock investment, which is very much growth, dividends, and valuation. And so really over the last 3 to 5 years, the fund has outperformed the benchmark, although over the last year, obviously it's been tougher, we're behind the benchmark, but this is really the power of stock selection. The result was not really achieved sort of because of sort of past or recent performance, but rather as a result of very stable returns that we've achieved over that sort of 5 years investing in global stocks. And when compared to most other global equity funds within the same Morningstar category, the fund ranks within the top 10% over 3 and 5 years and was ranked 6th out of 137 funds over the last 5 years. So perhaps just explaining a little bit more in detail which stocks have generated those returns over the last 5 years. And this table shows the top 10 stocks which contributed to the performance of the fund, which is on the left-hand side, and then on the index on the right-hand side. And you can see that over the last 5 years, index returns were principally derived from Mag 7 stocks, and all 10 key contributors to the market came from the US. The fund returns, on the other hand, were drawn from a far more diverse group across sectors and geographies. And so in this way, over the past sort of 5 years, we've earned returns from stocks that are very different to the market.
このなかなかアクティブ運用はインデックス運用に勝てないと言われている中でいい結果でした。このインデックスファンドをお持ちの方でも合わせてこの世界のベストを持つと収益源が分散されているということで、全ての投資信託の中でも人気になっているというのがよく分かりました。国や地域、業種、バリューやグロースと言いましたスタイルが偏らない運用を心がけているということなんですけれども、具体的にはどのようなポートフォリオになっているんでしょうか。
So as I mentioned earlier, we are really aiming to be an all-weather fund for stock investments, and we take very much a bottom-up approach. As I said, focusing very much on growth, dividend, and valuation, and that's really the key, we think, to investment performance. And therefore, we hope to achieve investment performance in all market conditions. So as you said, we're not leaning towards any specific style. And these are the top 10 stocks that we have in the portfolio. And as a result, we don't have much in terms of the Magnificent Seven within the fund. And I imagine actually this list includes many stocks which people won't have heard of. So although this is very much an outcome of individual stock selection, when you look at the sector weightings within the fund compared to the benchmark, the MSCI World, the fund is overweight sectors such as financials and industrials and underweight technology. And similarly by region, if you look, compared to the fund's benchmark, the MSCI World, North America is underweight while Europe is overweight within the portfolio.
このパッシブ運用で世界株式のインデックスに分散投資している場合、中身を見ますと結構アメリカであったり情報技術の割合が高くなっているんですね。世界のベストを合わせて持つとよりポートフォリオが分散されたものになるということがこれで分かりました。さて、その世界のベストではセクターでは先ほど資本財サービスと金融が多く組み入れられていまして、国と地域別ではヨーロッパが多く組み入れられていました。この理由は何でしょうか。
So both of those are really a result of our bottom-up approach. So first, the portfolio allocation to industrials, that is a relatively overweight, but the stocks included are very diverse. They include companies such as railway companies, engine development companies, and also government contract recipients, all of which have strong competitive advantages in their respective fields. And really, because the price movements within that sector are very different, we believe that the overall portfolio risk can effectively be reduced, even if the allocation to the sector looks high. Similarly with financials, the fund is also overweight financials versus the index, but this again is a very diversified set of companies within the portfolio and includes a lot of high quality stocks incorporating life insurance, non-life insurance, some exchange businesses, and also some investment companies. And I think when you hear the word finance, you often think banks. Actually, the fund is underweight banks compared to the index. So the fund is not only sort of, I guess, diversified not just by business, but also by region. And we invest in a lot of companies that will benefit from population growth in parts of the world outside of the US, many sort of emerging markets. So Standard Chartered, for instance, and also AIA Group.
そうなんですね。一見投資比率の高いセクターに見えても、そのセクターの中で分散されているということで、数字だけではわからない側面でした。続いてヨーロッパの比率が高い点についても教えてくださいますか。
Yeah, so if you look at sort of, I guess, regarding the overweight of some of the European stocks within the portfolio, if you look at the chart on the left-hand side of the page, this shows the P levels of various stocks in the US, in Europe, and stocks within which we are invested in the global best fund. And as a market as a whole, the European market tends to be much cheaper than the US market. And we can also see that European stocks are more likely to pay dividends than the US counterparts. And this is really due to historical reasons. US companies generally prefer share buybacks, while European companies have tended to prioritize dividends over time. But look, stable dividends ultimately provide a very stable return to us as shareholders and investors, which we think is very important. So look, I guess more importantly, many of the companies within the global best, they're very global business, and they derive the majority of their sales from outside of Europe. They're sort of where they may be listed. So in other words, despite being European stocks, the actual business are conducted on a global scale, and that again really helps with geographic diversification. So, what we do in Global Best, we're trying to identify high-quality companies that we think are undervalued, and often this is because they're seen just as European stocks. We aim to try and find attractive value opportunities and stable dividends, whilst also capitalizing on global growth opportunities.
マーケットが急変した時ですね、去年の8月であったり今年の4月、直近でも2回株価の急落を見ました。こうした急落時のパフォーマンスはどうだったのか、またそうした際に運用者は何をしているのか、こういった点はいかがでしょうか。
So in the past, when markets have fallen reasonably sharply, we've actually tended to perform better than global and US markets. So look, this chart shows the performance of the fund against some of the main indices in 2025, the summer of 2024, and also the summer of 2022, when we witnessed significant market sell-offs due to recession fears. And as you can see, the fund managed to outperform the different indices across all of those different time periods. And really, look, this is, I think, partly a function of the fund's focus on valuation and also dividends, as well as the fact that the fund is more diversified than the market and less influenced by specific sectors or the macro environment. And the outcome of the fund really should be driven by stock specifics and careful portfolio construction. And ultimately, we believe that avoiding major losses is the key to winning over the long term. So let me sort of introduce perhaps the investment actions that we've taken this year. And really the key word is a contrarian approach. And let me sort of first explain what that means. So we've consistently taken a contrarian approach, and that's really taking the opposite position on a number of things. So the diagram on the left really shows our approach in action and how we work. So when a share price falls below its intrinsic value, often triggered by short-term news or some kind of market sentiment, that's when we tend to step in and buy it. And then once the price recovers and we think reflects more fully the company's fundamentals, that's when we will typically exit the position. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see the impact of that. So whilst the NAV of the fund has grown over time, the fund's PE remains stable, the price-earnings ratio. And this is because we're trying to replace overvalued stocks or stocks which are at fair value with those that we consider to be undervalued. So now, with stock prices hovering around record highs at the moment and unit prices rising as they are now, people may just think, are things sort of overpriced now? But as you can just see, we think the fund is by no means overpriced because that price-earnings ratio has remained stable over that time.
コントラリアンアプローチですね。いわゆる逆張りのアプローチを取っていらっしゃるということでした。では今後の運用方針であったり、運用者として注意しているマクロ要因があれば教えてくださいますか。
So the investment policy really remains unchanged. We tend to focus very much on the bottom up. That's how we select our stocks. And we're analysing stocks, as I said, in terms of growth, dividend, and valuation. Those are really the key hallmarks of our stock selection and how we go about investing and finding good companies. So we're not really that influenced by macro factors, but I suppose the following points would make some sense. So look, these are some of the key sort of risk scenarios as we see them this year, and these are some of the things that the team has thought about. So first, rising geopolitics and sort of policy risks such as US tariff risks that we saw earlier this year. Those definitely remain a concern. under a Trump administration, I think it's fair that there are often unexpected announcements, and that's definitely something we consider going forward. So look, with that in mind, and in such circumstances, we consider companies such as Rolls-Royce that we own, companies with extremely high barriers to entry. That really is the kind of thing you want to focus on, as they benefit from having those high barriers to entry. Secondly, an economic slowdown. Look, I think this could occur. We're seeing some softening in data at the moment, but this could occur if the tariff impact is perhaps more substantial than people worried about. And that may hit businesses and consumer spending. And so we tend to focus then on quite stable names such as 3i that I mentioned, and also CCP, which is Coca-Cola European Pacific Partners. Those companies offer very solid growth and attractive dividends as well. And then look, finally, I think there is some uncertainty around the AI boom. So we have invested in AI companies such as Broadcom and Nvidia as well. But I think it's important that we also own companies such as Viking Holdings, which will benefit from growth outside of AI. And so this way, as I mentioned, the team really is trying to build a diversified portfolio that can deliver stable returns in lots of different environments. And look, as we go into 2026, that will be exactly the philosophy that we continue to follow next year as well.
お話しいただいたリスクに関しましては、本当に皆さん気になるところだと思いまして、こういった運用方針を聞けて一つの安心材料になったのではないでしょうか。さて、ここまでスティーブンさんに銘柄選択の極意について伺ってきましたけれども、この成長、配当、割安という株式投資の王道と呼べる、ある意味非常にシンプルな点に着目して銘柄を選んでいらっしゃるということでした。奥が深いですよね。大変勉強になったなというふうに思いました。本当に貴重な機会でした。今日のお話で個人の力ではなかなか見つけられない世界の個別銘柄にもアクティブ投資なら投資が可能になるというか、アプローチしていけるんだなということもよく分かりました。スティーブンさんのお話ここまでなんですけれども、今日はどうもありがとうございました。改めましてスティーブンさん、拍手でお送りください。ありがとうございました。今日のご登壇の方のお話を通しまして、これから世界市場の見方、投資判断のヒントを多く得られたんではないでしょうか。私自身も非常に勉強になりました。木下さんのマクロの視点、そしてスティーブンさんの実践的な銘柄選択のお話ですね。世界のマーケットを見ているお二人からこんなにリアルな投資の現場のお話聞ける機会というのは貴重でした。本日は日経 CNBC 主催インベスコアセットマネジメント共催どうなる2026年マーケット、プロから学ぶ銘柄選択の極意にご参加いただきまして誠にありがとうございました。皆様、忘れ物がございませんようにお気をつけてお帰りください。ありがとうございました。